Imagine a loving, like a fiercely protective home. It's 3 a.m. on a Sunday,
Right.
and a horrific, blinding winter storm is raging outside. I mean, the kind that knocks out power grids and just turns roads into rivers.
Yeah, absolute blackout conditions.
Exactly. The doors are locked. The family is sound asleep. So how does a cautious, terrified of the dark 9-year-old girl end up walking down a pitch-black highway completely alone?
And actively running away from the only people trying to help her.
Right, actively running away.
That is the defining paradox of our discussion today. You're looking at a scenario that violently rejects every statistical baseline we have for, how and why children go missing.
It really does.
Because when the behavioral evidence contradicts the physical evidence, investigations don't just stall, they completely fracture.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Because we are unpacking the verified reporting, the forensic mechanics, and the law enforcement records of two just haunting, unsolved cases of missing children from North Carolina.
Yeah, these are tough ones.
We are looking at the disappearances of Asha Degree and Brittany Locklear. And for the communities involved and the investigators who worked them, these stories never settled. They are open wounds.
Absolutely.
So our objective today is to tear into the timelines, the geographical profiling, and the forensic realities that still disturb investigators.
Okay.
Let's unpack this, because I want you, listening right now, to really understand the sheer terror of a mundane routine suddenly dissolving into a decades-long mystery.
And, before we dive into the actual mechanics of these timelines, we really need to establish our parameters.
Yeah.
Because the landscape of unsolved missing persons is notoriously thick with rumor, right?
Right.
And armchair detective work.
Oh, so much online speculation.
Right. So today, our analysis relies strictly on confirmed facts, publicly documented events, and established forensic science.
Just the facts.
Exactly. Whenever we explore speculative theories, which we have to do just to understand the investigative process, we will clearly label them as such.
Right. We'll let you know what's theory and what's fact.
Because the overarching theme we are exploring here isn't just mystery for mystery's sake. We are looking at the terrifying fragility of safety.
The fragility of safety. I mean, that framing is so crucial for our first case. We are starting with Asha Degree precisely because her story begins in a place of utmost security.
Yeah, her own home.
Right, her home in Shelby, North Carolina. And to understand the mechanics of what went wrong, we really need to understand the baseline here. So Asha Degree, born in 1990, the law enforcement records, the psychological profiles, they all paint a highly consistent picture. She was 9 years old, exceptionally quiet, responsible, and just intensely academically focused.
Right.
And the sources note her home environment was structured and deeply protective.
And that phrase, deeply protective, it isn't just some casual descriptor from a friendly neighbor.
What do you mean?
Well, in a missing child investigation, the FBI and local authorities, they conduct a rigorous, almost like an autopsy of the family dynamic.
Like looking for red flags?
Exactly. They look for hidden fractures, financial ruin, domestic violence, substance abuse, secret communications.
Right, anything that could trigger a runaway.
And they found absolutely nothing. I mean, zero. This was a rock-solid, loving household.
But wait, kids run away all the time, right?
Right.
I mean, are we saying it's rare for a kid her age to run or rare for her specific family dynamic?
Yeah.
Because I remember packing a bag when I was like 8 because I was mad about bedtime.
Sure, yeah. The intention to run away is common, but the execution of it in this specific manner is statistically microscopic.
Really? Microscopic?
Oh, yeah. What's fascinating here is how the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit categorizes these cases. They have distinct profiles.
Okay.
A child running away from a stable home environment usually has a documented catalyst, like severe rebellion, abuse, or a drastic shift in behavior over months.
And Asha didn't have any of that.
Zero prior indicators of distress. And furthermore, prepubescent children who do, actually run away, they typically do so during daylight. And they rarely make it further than a neighbor's yard or a local park before the reality of being independent kind of sends them running back home.
Like they get hungry or scared.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So walking out into a life-threatening storm at 3 a.m. requires a psychological driver that investigators simply could not map to a happy 9-year-old.
It's like her house was an impenetrable fortress where everything is functionally perfect.
Yeah.
Which makes her departure feel like a tear in the fabric of reality.
It really does.
You don't just breach a fortress from the inside unless something incredibly powerful is pulling you out or pushing you out. So let's reconstruct the exact hours before she vanished, because this is where the timeline completely defies logic.
Let's do it.
February 13, 2000. Let's talk about the environmental mechanics of that night, because it wasn't just raining.
No. Cleveland County was being battered by a severe winter storm. We are talking about heavy freezing rain, really powerful wind gusts, and near blackout conditions.
Just a miserable, dangerous night.
Right. And the sensory environment of that night is critical. A power outage or severe storm changes the acoustics of a house.
Oh, that's a good point. It's loud.
It's very loud. It masks sounds. It creates a hostile, terrifying exterior environment, especially for a child who, according to her family, was actively afraid of the dark and afraid of dogs.
Right. She wasn't some outdoorsy thrill seeker. And inside the house, it's a Sunday. Asha spent the day at church. Very routine. Later, she went to a basketball game. Now, the sources provide a very specific psychological detail here. She fouled out of the game early, and she was visibly upset about her performance.
Which is completely normal for a kid that age.
Exactly. We've all been 9. Failing at something in front of a crowd feels like the end of the world. Her team lost. But her family reported she seemingly recovered, went home, watched television, and went to bed around 8:00 p.m.
Right. A completely ordinary emotional arc, frustration followed by decompression.
Yeah.
There is nothing in the behavioral residue of that evening to suggest she was, like, plotting a midnight escape.
But here's where the investigative window gets impossibly tight, because her parents were hypervigilant. At 2:30 a.m., Asha's mother physically checks the room.
Right.
Both Asha and her older brother are sound asleep in their respective beds. Then at 3 a.m., just 30 minutes later, Asha's father returns home from a late work shift.
Right. He gets off work.
He checks the house, he checks the kids, no disturbances. Asha is there.
So this establishes a verifiable visual baseline of security at 3 a.m. Asha is in her bed. The house is secure.
But hold on. If her dad checked at 3 a.m. and the first confirmed external sighting of her is around 3:45 a.m., we are talking about a 45-minute window.
At most.
How does a 9-year-old wake up? Quietly get dressed in weather-appropriate clothing, pack a book bag, unlock the doors, and vanish into a howling storm without waking a brother sleeping in the exact same room, or parents who are awake down the hall.
That is the mechanical impossibility that just haunts this case.
It's crazy.
Because synthesizing the data, you have to account for the noise of rustling clothes, the opening of doors, the shifting of deadbolts.
Yeah, locks are loud.
Doing this undetected requires either incredible luck, intense premeditation, or the masking noise of the storm itself.
Wow, yeah. The wind hiding the sound of the door.
Exactly. But the broader point is the contradiction of her nature. A child afraid of the dark, deliberately dressing for a blackout storm and slipping out undetected, defies every known behavioral profile of Asha Degree.
It's chilling, because somehow she actually did it.
Yeah.
The next time we have a geographical pin on Asha, she has breached the fortress.
Right.
We transition to Highway 18. Between 3:45 a.m. and 4:45 a.m., multiple motorists are out driving in this atrocious weather, and they report seeing a small child walking alone along the highway.
And we have to analyze the kinesiology and the behavioral clues provided by these witnesses.
Okay, break that down.
Well, they didn't describe a kid meandering or stumbling. Multiple independent accounts stated she was walking with purpose.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you picture a kid lost in a storm, the biomechanics are panic, right? They're shivering, crying, maybe waving their arms at headlights, seeking the nearest source of heat or an adult. But she's marching down the shoulder of a dark highway.
Like she has a destination.
Exactly. And then a driver actually turns his vehicle around. He approaches her to help. And what does Asha do? She doesn't run toward the headlights. She runs away from the car, off the road, and plunges directly into the pitch-black, storm-soaked woods.
The psychology of that moment is profoundly telling.
It's so weird.
Because if we look at the survival instincts of a lost child, they invariably seek an adult or a source of light. Running away from a potential rescuer into an unlit, dense woodland implies one of two things.
Okay, what are they?
Either she was in a state of sheer panic and viewed the motorist as a threat.
Which is possible if she was taught not to talk to strangers.
Right. Or, secondly, she had a level of determination to reach a specific destination that completely superseded her immediate need for safety.
Wow. It's like she was following an invisible tether, like a map only she could see. But what happens to the physical tracking? Because I know investigators brought in dogs.
They did.
If you have a confirmed location of where she entered the woods, Shouldn't bloodhounds be able to track a 9-year-old on foot pretty easily?
In optimal conditions, yes. But we have to factor in the meteorological interference here.
The storm.
Right. Heavy, freezing rain is catastrophic for scent tracking. The water literally washes the sloughed skin cells and sweat the raft of scent that dogs follow into the soil, or it just washes it away down drainage paths.
So the rain basically destroyed the trail.
The storm effectively scrubbed the geographic canvas clean.
Which means law enforcement isn't tracking a person anymore. They are relying entirely on physical breadcrumbs left behind.
Exactly.
And the first breadcrumb is found on February 15th, 2 days after she vanished. Searchers find a shed near where she ran into the woods. Inside, they find candy wrappers, a pencil, and a Mickey Mouse hair bow belonging to Asha.
And there's a critical detail from the crime scene technicians regarding that shed. There were absolutely no signs of forced entry.
Which is a detail that just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because it means she sought shelter, she found an unlocked door, and huddled in the dark, eating candy she had packed. It kind of strips away the mystery for a second and just leaves a vulnerable, freezing little girl.
It humanizes the timeline in a really devastating way.
It does. But she didn't stay there. And the investigation hits a wall for over a year.
18 agonizing months of absolute silence until August 2001.
Right.
A discovery is made that fundamentally alters the temporal and geographic scope of the entire investigation.
Yeah, a construction crew is excavating land along Highway 18, but now they're in Burke County. This is 26 miles north of Asha's home.
A massive distance for a child on foot.
And they unearth something buried in the soil, heavily double-wrapped in black plastic trash bags. It's Asha's book bag.
And the condition, and specifically the contents of that bag, they instantly transition the behavioral profile from a runaway scenario to a highly probable criminal abduction.
Wait, let's look at the mechanics of this bag. It's buried 26 miles away, wrapped in plastic like some kind of forensic time capsule.
Yes.
That completely shatters the idea that she just wandered into the woods, got lost, and succumbed to the elements, right?
Absolutely does.
A freezing 9-year-old doesn't meticulously double bag her backpack to protect it from moisture and then bury it 3 counties over.
Precisely. The method of concealment, the plastic wrapping, and the subterranean burial is a massive forensic indicator.
It's premeditated.
It screams intentional concealment by a third party. It shows a perpetrator who is organized, who's taking measures to prevent discovery, and who is actively trying to distance the physical evidence from the primary crime scene.
But the contents of the bag are what really throw investigators into a tailspin. Yes, it had Asha's clothing in it, but it also contained items that did not belong to her.
And this is where it gets really dark.
A Dr. Seuss children's book that belonged to a local school library but was never checked out by Asha, and a new Kids on the Block t-shirt.
The introduction of foreign objects into a victim's personal effects is a profiling goldmine and also an absolute nightmare.
How do they even confirm it's a foreign object? Like, couldn't it just be a hand-me-down the parents forgot about? Or something she traded with a friend?
That's a great question. Investigators conduct exhaustive forensic and familial audits. They trace the manufacturing batch of the shirt. They interview extended family. They look at literally years of school photographs.
Oh, they go that deep.
They have to. And they definitively ruled out that the t-shirt belonged to anyone in the Degree household. The presence of these alien items introduces the undeniable prospect that someone else's environment intersected with Asha's bag.
So we have this wildly conflicting set of data: the pristine home, the impossibly tight 45-minute window, the purposeful marching in a hurricane-level storm, the candy wrappers in the shed, and a heavily concealed bag 26 miles away containing a stranger's t-shirt.
It's a lot.
How does the FBI even begin to synthesize this into a working theory?
Well, they map the data against established criminal profiles. But what makes Asha's case so incredibly frustrating is that every major theory perfectly explains half of the evidence while completely contradicting the other half.
Right. Take the voluntary departure theory. The packed bag and the purposeful walking support this. She planned to leave. But the catalyst is entirely missing.
Exactly.
Why does she leave? And more importantly, how does she end up buried 26 miles away?
The psychological profile vigorously rejects voluntary departure without external influence. The frustration over a basketball game is severely insufficient to trigger a premeditated midnight escape into freezing rain.
Which brings us to the grooming or luring scenario.
Right.
This theory suggests an adult she trusted convinced her to pack a bag and meet them outside. It bridged the gap between her responsible nature and a reckless action.
Because behaviorally, a highly obedient child might walk into a storm if an adult authority figure they implicitly trust told them they had to.
But practically speaking, the mechanics of luring in the year 2000 are incredibly difficult here.
Mhm.
We aren't talking about a kid with a smartphone and hidden Snapchat messages.
No, the technology wasn't there.
The family didn't even have a family computer connected to the early internet. So how does a predator establish an invisible tether to a child whose entire life revolves around a deeply protective home, church, and school?
That is the big question.
And if she was meeting someone outside her house at 3 a.m., why was she walking alone on Highway 18 45 minutes later?
That is the glaring hole in the luring theory. If a predator groomed her to leave the house, the point of extraction is the house itself or the immediate end of the driveway.
Right, they put her in a car immediately.
They do not force the child to hike miles down a busy, weather-beaten highway where they could be seen by motorists, which is exactly what happened.
Then there's the opportunistic stranger abduction theory. She leaves on her own, for some unknown adolescent reason. She's walking down the highway. She runs into the woods to hide from the first motorist. But eventually she encounters someone else. Someone who offers assistance out of the cold, but whose intentions are malevolent.
This aligns with the 26-mile distance, the buried bag, and the foreign items. An opportunistic offender operates on sudden availability.
Like a crime of opportunity.
Exactly. They see a vulnerable target, they act, and then they engage in forensic countermeasures, like burying the victim's belongings miles away to confuse the geographic profile. But again, it fails to explain the inciting incident. Why was she out there to begin with?
So what does this all mean? It's maddening. The data simply refuses to align into a single, cohesive narrative.
It really does.
It feels like there is a missing puzzle piece, like a conversation or an event that happened in that house or in her mind before 3:11 a.m. that we will just never have access to.
And that ambiguity is the hallmark of Asha's case. It is a prolonged, deeply ambiguous mystery where the timeline stretches and the behavioral evidence is completely contradictory. I mean,
Yeah.
what stands out to you? Does a 9-year-old pack a bag and walk into a storm without an external catalyst? It's baffling.
It is, which makes our transition to the second case so jarring.
Yeah, a very different case.
We are moving from the agonizingly slow, contradictory burn of the unknown to a case defined by its horrifying speed and brutal certainty. We are looking at the murder of Brittany Locklear.
If Asha's disappearance is characterized by silence, midnight shadows, and behavioral anomalies, Brittany's case is characterized by daylight, sudden violence, and the terrifying exploitation of a mundane routine.
Brittany Locklear was a 5-year-old kindergartner. She lived in Shannon, North Carolina. This is a small rural community in Hoke County.
Right.
The sources describe her as a bright, happy 5-year-old girl incredibly close to her mother.
The baseline environment here is just as important as in Asha's case, but for entirely different reasons. We are looking at a highly visible public setting during the morning rush.
The timeline is January 7th, 1998. It centers around 6:45 a.m. The sun is just starting to come up. Brittany's mother walks her down the driveway to the school bus stop,
A completely normal morning.
but the bus is running slightly late.
A minor, everyday logistical hiccup that creates a fatal window of vulnerability.
Because Brittany's mother has an infant inside the house. So she tells Brittany to wait right there at the stop. She turns around and steps inside the house, just briefly, to check on the crying baby. We are talking about an incredibly brief window of time, 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes.
The psychological shock of the ordinary is what makes this so terrifying. Stepping inside to check on a baby is something parents do millions of times a day without a second thought.
I do it all the time.
Right. It is an utterly normal, reasonable action.
But within those 60 seconds, the unthinkable happens.
Mhm.
Witnesses people waking up, drinking coffee, looking out their windows report, seeing a white pickup truck pull up near the bus stop.
Out of nowhere.
A man jumps out, violently forces this screaming 5-year-old child into the vehicle, and speeds away in broad daylight.
The brazenness of this crime is what stands out to behavioral analysts. In criminal profiling, this is known as a blitz attack.
A blitz attack.
Yeah. Taking a screaming child from a residential area during the morning commute speaks to an offender who is dangerously opportunistic, highly impulsive, and completely indifferent to the presence of witnesses.
Just totally reckless.
They are operating purely on predatory drive, entirely disregarding the massive risk of capture.
And the devastating conclusion of Brittany's abduction happened almost as quickly as the abduction itself. Investigators didn't have days to coordinate a massive search grid. They had to rapidly shift from a rescue mission to a homicide investigation on the exact same day.
The speed of the escalation from abduction to murder tells investigators a tremendous amount about the pathology of the perpetrator.
How so?
Well, they did not have a secure location to hold a victim. The crime was rapid, violent, and highly disorganized in its execution.
Right, because later that exact same day, January 7th, Brittany's body is discovered in a drainage ditch just 3 miles away from her home.
So close.
The records confirm she had been sexually assaulted and drowned. From the moment of abduction at 6:45 a.m. to the discovery 3 miles away, the entire horrific event occurred within an incredibly tight geographic and temporal radius.
That 3-mile radius is the anchor of the geographic profile.
So investigators immediately start looking at the evidence, and on paper, it seems like they have an overwhelming amount of leads. First, the vehicle. Multiple witnesses saw the abduction. They described an older model, white pickup truck.
Right, the white pickup.
But I have to push back here. How does a noisy, highly visible white pickup truck vanish in a small rural community after a broad daylight abduction? I mean, they had witnesses, they had a description.
This raises an important question, and it's where we have to unpack the concept of environmental camouflage and the mechanics of witness memory.
Environmental camouflage.
Yeah, you assume a white truck stands out. But in an agricultural county in North Carolina in 1998, an older model white pickup truck is arguably the single most common vehicle on the road.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't stand out. It is the background noise of that specific environment.
So it's not that the truck vanished into thin air. It's that it blended in perfectly with 1,000 other identical trucks driving to job sites that morning.
Exactly. And regarding the witnesses, human memory in a state of sudden trauma is highly unreliable for specifics. People experience inattentional blindness.
What's that?
They see the terror of the child, they register the broad color of the truck, but their brains do not record the license plate alphanumeric sequence or the specific rust patterns on the fender.
They're panicking.
Right. And without those unique identifiers, law enforcement is left pulling over every white truck in a 3-county radius, which is a logistical nightmare.
But they had something infinitely better than a license plate. They had DNA. The sources explicitly state that DNA was recovered from the crime scene where her body was found. They have the biological fingerprint of the killer.
They do, and this creates a profound, agonizing bottleneck in the investigation.
Wait, how so? If you have the DNA, don't you just put it in the computer and get a name? Like on TV.
This requires an understanding of how CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, actually works. Think of the DNA sample recovered from the crime scene like a perfectly clear barcode scanned from a product.
Okay.
You have the exact barcode. But until that exact item is physically entered into the store's inventory database, the scanner will just keep beeping, "Item not found."
Right, sure.
CODIS only contains the DNA profiles of individuals who have been previously convicted of qualifying crimes or whose DNA was collected during a prior arrest.
I see. So when they ran this killer's DNA through the national databases, it yielded absolutely no match. The scanner just beeped, "not found," which means this brutal, brazen offender had miraculously never been caught for a qualifying felony before.
Or they operated in jurisdictions where DNA collection wasn't mandated at the time of their prior offenses. You have the ultimate forensic tool, but without a comparative profile, the DNA remains entirely silent. It tells you the gender of the killer, but it doesn't give you a name or an address.
And the community ripple effect in Hoke County must have been catastrophic.
Right.
Widespread, paralyzing fear.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources mention parents physically escorting their older children to bus stops, waiting in their cars until the bus doors closed. Schools completely overhauling security protocols. The baseline of trust in that town was permanently shattered.
The psychological impact of a daylight blitz attack on a child is that it completely destroys the illusion of the safe zone. If it can happen in 60 seconds at a neighborhood bus stop, it can happen anywhere. This intense community pressure forces investigators to rapidly develop suspect profiles to figure out who is capable of this.
Let's break down those profiles. Because the physical evidence is logged in a database, investigators have to rely on behavioral theories. Theory 1 is the opportunistic offender. This is law enforcement's primary beliefs. The perpetrator didn't necessarily wake up planning to abduct Brittany Locklear specifically. They were driving by, saw a vulnerable child alone for a matter of seconds, and acted on a sudden, violent impulse.
This aligns with the blitz nature of the attack and the disorganized disposal of the body, but it leaves open the question of the offender's origin.
Which brings us to Theory 2, the local perpetrator. This comes heavily from the community and geographic profilers. The idea is that the offender had to know the area incredibly well.
Let's look at the mechanics of the 3-mile radius. To abduct a screaming child, navigate away from the scene without drawing police attention, and find a secluded drainage ditch to commit the assault and murder all in a matter of hours strongly implies an intimate knowledge of the back roads and the local topography.
That makes total sense. A transient offender, like a trucker passing through, would likely hit the highway and drive 50 miles away to secure a location.
Right, get as far away as possible.
The fact that the drop-off was just 3 miles away suggests the killer felt comfortable in that specific jurisdiction. They knew which dirt roads were empty at 7 a.m.
It's a terrifying thought for the community because it implies the killer was one of them. Someone who bought groceries at the same store. Someone who drove that white truck to a local job site the very next day.
There is a third theory, the serial offender. Some crime analysts have looked at the speed and brutality of the crime and suggested regional similarities to other cases. Someone who travels the rural routes of the Carolinas, hunting for targets of opportunity.
A predator just cruising the roads.
Right. But the sources are clear. There is no confirmed forensic link to any other case.
Which leaves the current status of Brittany Locklear's case in a state of agonizing suspension. The case remains open. The family is still waiting. But unlike cases from decades past where physical evidence simply degrades, investigators in this case have a trump card.
The DNA. It's this bitter, heartbreaking irony. They have the genetic blueprint of the man who did this. But for years, they just had to sit there and wait for the barcode to be entered into the system.
But here is where the mechanics of the investigation undergo a massive paradigm shift. They are no longer just waiting for a CODIS match. The technology of DNA analysis, specifically forensic genetic genealogy, has advanced exponentially.
Explain how that works, because this is the technology that caught the Golden State Killer, right?
Yeah.
How does it bypass the CODIS database?
Traditional CODIS testing looks at STRs, short tandem repeats, which are basically just the raw barcode for identification. Forensic genetic genealogy looks at SNPS, single nucleotide polymorphisms.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is, but what it does is incredible. It allows scientists to upload the killer's DNA to commercial or open-source genealogy databases, like GEDmatch. They aren't looking for the killer himself, they're looking for his third cousins, his great aunts.
Oh, they use the DNA to build a massive family tree backward, and then they trace the branches forward to find the one guy in the family who lived in Hope County in 1998 and drove a white truck.
Exactly. It completely circumvents the need for the offender to have a prior criminal record. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation continues to test and retest the evidence in Brittany's case as these genealogical techniques become more sophisticated.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we have to look at what these two cases represent in the broader landscape of unsolved mysteries. We have Asha Degree, a silent, baffling disappearance into a chaotic, stormy night, leaving behind a trail of bizarre, unexplainable breadcrumbs 26 miles away.
Yeah.
And we have Brittany Locklear, a violently fast theft in the broad daylight of a regular morning. There are polar opposites in their execution.
They are mechanically opposite, yes, but they represent the exact same core trauma, the absolute darkest fears of a community. They remind us that the boundaries we draw to feel secure, the locked doors, the quiet neighborhoods, the 60-second morning routines can be breached in ways we cannot predict or completely defend against.
And both of these families are still out there. They haven't stopped advocating. They are still seeking justice, fighting to keep these names in the public consciousness. So to you, listening to this, let these stories be a reminder of the duty we have to keep these memories alive and the ongoing, relentless pursuit of justice.
I want to leave you with one final philosophical concept to mull over, something we've touched on throughout the mechanics of these investigations, but that serves as the ultimate divide between Asha's case and Brittany's case, and that is the wildly divergent role of time.
What do you mean? Time is always the enemy in a cold case, isn't it? Memories fade, witnesses pass away.
Usually, yes. Look at Asha Degree. For her investigation, time is the ultimate adversary. It has physically buried the context of her disappearance. The landscape of Highway 18 has changed. The storm washed away the immediate scent trails and the unknown items in her backpack. The book, the shirt offer no modern forensic solutions because they were degraded in the earth for 18 months.
Those all just gone.
Right. For Asha, human memory, which degrades like an old VHS tape, is the only tool we have left to fight against the passage of time. Someone has to remember something.
But for Brittany Locklear,
For Brittany Locklear, time might actually be the ultimate weapon for justice. Every single year that passes, the relentless advancement of genetic genealogy evolves. The biological evidence left behind on that January morning isn't degrading, it's waiting patiently in a sterile lab.
Wow.
Time is what will eventually build the family tree that decodes it.
That really forces you to think about how we solve the unsolvable. How do we, as a society, balance the fading, unreliable nature of human memory against the cold, evolving precision of forensic science? For Asha, we are desperately fighting time. But for Brittany, time might just be the very thing that finally catches a killer. Until next time, keep seeking the truth.